Hello, my name is Andreas Gavrielatos. I'm a lecturer in classics at the University of Reading, Department of Classics, and I've been working in Reading for the past 8 years as a lecturer. Before then, I taught at the University of Edinburgh, the Open University of Cyprus, and I have held positions at the University of Leeds as well. Research revolves around something which I'm fascinated about since I was a little child. I grew up in the shores of Euboea, approximately around Agamemnon departed for Troy with the other Greeks, the place where he sacrificed his own daughter. At least that's what he and his people would believe. I grew up hearing about all the glorious stories of the past, and they were things that really inspired me and taught me that I can learn from the past, I can learn from that experience, and I can learn from how these people lived, how these people believed, their aims, goals, how would they achieve them, how they managed to maintain a balance in their lives, how they cultivated themselves, how they built those great civilizations, and they developed morals, ethics, respect for each other, that inspired and led into humanism, the humanities, as it was much later developed and has influenced the respect we have for each other nowadays. Research-wise, my interests revolve mostly around, if I want to find an art topic, they revolve around the way people lived, how they experienced the everything, the historical, the political, the cultural developments of the time. How would people react in what was going on? Currently, I'm working on a book on satire. Satire is a social practice. That is, satire not simply as another literary genre, a formalistic approach into a genre people would write about, but satire as something people would do as a form of opposition, a way to express their opposition to the social norms, the conformism and the conventions of the time. So the satirist becomes a non-conformist, someone who will defy the rules of the society and speak against those in power. That voice of opposition is something we don't encounter that often in our sources, but we can learn a lot. We can learn about how to achieve happiness, like the Stoics said, how to achieve happiness, like the Stoics said. Seneca, the philosopher in particular, Seneca the Younger, in his letters, he writes, I published quite recently, to his friend in a way of lifelong learning, adult education, if you like, and he advises his friend to keep cultivating himself, to seek the inner knowledge, seek inner balance, inner peace, and that would lead humans into happiness. So through the study of those texts, we can actually achieve so much, and we can learn not only about ourselves, but also about society. We can also be pragmatists and learn more things than we believe about how to deal with things in our everyday lives, perhaps even in our professions. One of the modules I've been teaching over the last couple of years here at the University of Reading, a module that is being addressed to all students across the university from all departments, is about the leadership qualities and the leadership values. What is it that makes one a great leader? How is a great leader being appreciated? What's the perception we're having about leadership nowadays? And we discuss all these aspects and we address all those issues based on the information we can actually get from those ancient texts. We know of leaders. We've heard of Pericles. We've heard of Agricola, the great governor of Britain. We've heard of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. All these people, and not just men. We've heard of Boudica, the British Queen of the King. We've heard of Cleopatra. So many leaders, leadership personalities, each one with their own style. Some of them being very respectful towards the subjects and the people around them. Some others not that much. Whether we're seeking advice with regards to how a politician would be, seeking advice about how a manager would be, we can actually find that advice in those sources. And there's so many angles and so many perspectives and different questions that expand beyond the theoretical approaches we can now have in our hands. And they can tell us a bit more about how those skills were perceived, how they were formed, the moral values and the ethics of the time, what was considered efficient. So this is an aspect we can learn of and we can tell so much about. So this is another one of my research interests, and my teaching in that module is research driven, is based on the research I'm conducting, and recently a book that was finalized based on the leadership skills and values that we can actually learn from the ancient world, which I have edited with a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Emma Nicholson from the University of Exeter. Apart from the study, the big study on Roman satire that I'm working on, apart from the leadership values that I'm also considering, a final aspect which I enjoy, perhaps, I don't want to say the most, but an aspect which I find really fascinating and I have been working on since the years of my PhD thesis, is actually the personal names people take. How are we named? How did our parents choose the names to give us? And if we go back and collect names and naming practices from the ancient world, we will find that many different, such a multitude in the ways people would choose their own names if they had the opportunity to change them. How were those names affected by cultural, political, linguistic changes and interactions around us, and what can those names tell us about ourselves and about societies, the societies we live in? I'm not asking what is a name, because it's quite a banal question nowadays, but what I'm asking is, what does a name say about each one of us? My main goal in working with antiquity and classical texts and asking all those questions, may it be about satire as a social practice, may it be about great leaders and how they performed, or maybe about the names people would take and how people would name each other. I'm doing all these things because I believe they are crucial for our society, because the way we can move forward is if we embrace what has defined humanity so far, and we can learn that and we can embrace that by carrying on and continuing looking and searching and exploring those sources. Not that much as a way of showing off what we actually know. One of my most favorite satires, that is Perseus, the Roman satirist Perseus, actually is being questioned, or he's actually been challenged rather, by someone, an imaginary interlocutor in his head, who asks him and say, so is there a point in knowing something unless you're willing to show off? And Perseus reacts to it and says that's not the point of knowing. The point of knowledge is to discover the truth. The point of knowledge is to learn something that first will help you, and second will give you what you need to help society and be an important part in that society. When I get to combine my interests and find satirical approaches in the naming practices, and then tell that this is how naming of people actually works, but sometimes it can be funny or challenging to some of the authors of the time. I tend to think back into comedy and satire. Recently, I've published on a couple of those occasions, and I would like to share. Aristophanes, for example, presents a couple, a married couple, who are in the process of naming the first son. They're both very keen to name their son and to give him a name that will have specific connotations, will be prestigious, something that will show this person or will make this person appear as someone important in the future. And so the two quarrel, and the husband is the one who narrates and says, I translate, after that, when the son was born to the two of us, that is myself and my high-born wife, he's not an aristocrat, but his wife was. From that moment, we started to squabble over the name, for she was adding a hippos to the boy's name, like Xanthipus or Keripus or Callipides. Hippos because it was considered that names that had compound names with hippos, the Greek word for horse, were considered as prestigious, meaning that the person who would have that name would have many horses, someone who would be a member of the elite, someone very wealthy. So this is why the wife in this couple would want a name as such, while I, the husband speaks, was giving the name of his grandfather Phedonides. Phyto. The husband comes from a poor family, or if not poor, not of an aristocratic family, that became wealthy because of a good management, economic and financial management, because of good organization. And this is why he wants to name the child after his own father. And they argued, the couple, for some time, until finally we both compromised and gave him the name Phydipides. The combination of the two names, Phaedo and Epides, was something that was quite common as a practice. But in this case, it is something that makes little sense. The audience at the time would actually laugh at that naming practice. What is satirized here are the etiquettes, the social etiquettes, the prestige that is quite often attached to naming practices, common social practices. Can't we learn from it today? Today, don't we actually like etiquettes? Don't we like stereotypes? Isn't today that according to the fashion we follow, the way we dress, according to what names we have, according to the way we present ourselves on social media, we expect that our audiences, the people who surround us, will respect us, admire us, or find us charming, or perhaps even handsome for that reason, just because of the way we show ourselves outwards. Something similar was happening back then, and this is what Aristophanes here satirizes, amongst many other things. Again, this is something that later the Stoic philosophers I mentioned just before, the ones who would speak mostly about the inner balance, about the freedom from all the things that bound us on earth, the passions, the things that make us sad. Seneca, for example, would say that if you liberate yourself from the things that make you sad, it means that you will be entirely free. What are those things? First of all, ambition. If you liberate yourself from excessive ambition, it means that you won't be disappointed as often, and therefore there's no chance you'll be sad. You will always strive for the best, and you will achieve it at some point. But if it's not your priority, you will never be sad about it. Liberate yourself from greed, from the need to have money, to live in luxury, because If you have them, then you'll be happy. But if you don't have them, you won't be sad. In the same way, people believed that because they would have names that could denote the status of a fit man, of a fit person, that they could be really free. Perseus the satirist, my favorite satirist, as I said earlier, he actually mocks that, and he satirizes the fact that people believed for each other what their names, what the social appearances would actually tell about them. And he writes, freedom is a requisite, not the sort of freedom that its Publius of a single tribe has earned, so that he gets a voucher for free shabby grains. How barren of truth are they, for whom a simple turn makes one a Roman citizen. This Dama is a worthless stable lad, runny-eyed from flat wine and lying over some little animal feed. His master will have him turn around, and from the trail in a moment he emerges Marcus Dama, a miracle. What Perseus satirizes here is the practice of one becoming a freed citizen, but at the same time changing one's name. In society, one would appear from that moment onwards as a freed person, and he satirizes the fact that the social appearance would be enough for him to gain respect. And again, we learn a lot from satirizing that process. How today, in our society, sometimes people are respected not for who they really are, but for the way they actually appear, and those appearances. And to go back into our classes about lectures about leadership, to go back into my research around leadership, and one can learn, a leader is not a good leader because they appear as such. A leader is never a good leader because they show us having good intentions and good leadership skills and values. A leader is a good leader because they truly are. We have to be critical, and we have to understand people for what they really are, and appreciate society for what it really is, and not for the way things appear. In the forthcoming book, which should appear within the next year, hopefully, if I have to say that all these things that have informed my study and all the interests I have just mentioned will come together, I'm actually saying how the satirist is a person who lives in some form of solitude. They're able to recognize some two things in society that nobody else does. And nobody else does because everyone is blinded by appearances. The satirist is the one who has that critical eye and is able to criticize and explore society for what it really is. Take over the veil that conceals the truth and present it to us. At the end, that person won't be very well received in society. It will be like the philosopher king. Plato said that when they realize what the truth is and they go back into the cave, the people in the society will actually attack that person because they won't trust him. The satirist, again, won't be trusted at first. People won't like the truth they're hearing about themselves. The satirist, however, is a brave person. Foucault said that the truth teller is the bravest one of all, the bravest person, because dares to say the truth nobody else would actually recognize. And this is the approach I'm taking towards satire. Satire as a practice, a social practice that formed so many literary genres and stories, from Gulliver's Travels all the way to the satires of Horace and Perseus and Juvenal, even to modern satire. Even satire we find in different media, and either the intermediality of that social practice and its expression. One of the very inspiring things I found in Percy's satire, for example, is when he says that everyone has ass's ears, but they won't tell about themselves, but they won't even tell to each other. Himself, he believes that he's not allowed to say. There's that social convention that no one will ever say to the other person what really happens and who they really are. But it's the truth that burns inside that he wants to express, he wants to share with the others. So he says that he's going to dig it he's going to hide it very deeply in his book. By reading the book, the audience will and the reader will actually discover the truth. And the truth is that all that society is obsessed with appearances, and they live in appearances and not in what truly is. The texts I'm studying, the way I'm approaching the past, has informed me. Repeat, the text I'm studying and the texts I've been researching, the ways I'm learning from the past, have taught me a single thing. We need to be critical towards those sources. We need to explore them, learn from all of them, because they will help us be better people, freed from passions, freed from passions, and they will give us the inner happiness we all want to achieve in a way that we can contribute to our societies at the same time.